Students Who Design is a podcast and video series that bridges students and the design industry. By students, for students. Be sure to check out our website, studentswho.design. This is Students Who Design. Today's episode is kinda special. We'll be joined by this show's host, Sahil Khoja. He's currently a junior studying information science at Cornell, and he spent this past summer as a product design intern at Facebook. Today we'll be discussing his path through product design as well as this very project. We hope you enjoy this episode. Students Who Design is sponsored in part by Facebook Design. For more resources and information on designing at Facebook, visit facebook.design and check out open roles at facebook.com/careers. Hey Sahil, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm well, thank you for joining us. This is quite a treat.
Yes.
So first of all, I'd like to know where you go to school, what your major is, and where you've previously worked.
Yeah, so I go to school at Cornell. I study information science. Last summer I was a product design intern at Facebook. Prior to that I was at Intuit. And yeah.
Nice. So just generally, can you describe your path into product design?
Yeah. So in 2015, I just graduated high school, so it was May of 2015. And I found out that I would be going to Cornell in the spring. So I got off the wait list and they said that we don't have a lot of room in the fall, but by January, dorms will open up. So between May and December, I had about 8 months to kind of just do whatever. I didn't have to go to school. And this is when Sketch version 2, I think, had just released, and Medium was kind of blowing up with UX articles. Mm-hmm. And I was really interested in behavioral economics, and I liked art as a kid, and I think, or it's my belief that product design is kind of a combination between behavioral economics and art. It's how people think and interact with different products or things. Sure. So I started looking into other majors at Cornell because I was admitted for the Applied Economics and Management major, which is just a big word for business. And there's this major called Information Science, and they had a concentration in user experience. And I was like, cool, I'll take some of these classes when I go in the spring. But at that time, all my friends had just left for college. It was really weird because I was just at home. So I started looking on AngelList for different startups around Dallas that I could work for. So there was this one called Dangle. I'm not really sure if they exist anymore, but it was basically this one guy, and he wanted to make an app that helped parents assign tasks to their children. Oh, wow. And they were looking for this marketing intern, and I was like, maybe I can finesse this to be a design thing. Mm-hmm. So I did their marketing challenge, and then when I met him in person, I was like, look, I'll do your marketing stuff, but I really want to do design stuff. And he was like, oh, okay, yeah, we need design work anyway. So I started working for them for free, and he bought me my first Sketch license and Framer license, and so I started playing around with that. And started reading as much as I could on Medium. On my way to community college, because I was taking classes, I would listen to Design Details and This Week in Startups and other podcasts, and just really immersing myself. And I was like, this is really cool. And so what really solidified my interest was that winter, my family and I went to Southeast Asia for vacation, and we had to take Ubers in all of our cities just to get around. So I decided to interview all my drivers to just kind of see what issues did they have, kind of like a user research thing, but it became much bigger than that, than I don't like the app or this button doesn't work, but more so how Uber changed their daily lives for better or worse. And when I came back, this was my first week at Cornell, so I wrote up a blog post about my experience in all these user interviews and some prototypes. And I remember getting a bunch of emails from designers at Uber, and the Southeast Asia design manager, his name is Jel Prinz, asked me if I wanted to come on full time, to work. And I don't think he knew I had just started school, so it was really weird. It was really cool, but it was also I didn't really know what to say. I remember sitting in my bed in my dorm, and we were just Skyping, and I was like, I'm a freshman, and he was like, oh, okay, hit me up in 4 years. But I was like, this is cool, people actually do this. And so I started to look for as many positions as I could, ended up at Intuit, which was in Dallas, which is my hometown, so that was a win-win situation, and that's how I kind of got into it.
That's incredible. It sounds like you're entirely intrinsically motivated.
Yeah, I think I've always been interested in people and how they interact or how they think, and this was the perfect blend between people and design. Mm-hmm.
So I kind of have this unique privilege where I am discussing somebody's design journey as a very part of that design journey through this podcast series, Students Who Design, that we're working on together. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about that. So I guess like in creating the podcast, both you and I have had to jump through a number of logistical and creative hoops, and we've met like such a diverse, I guess, group of designers along the way. So I guess first off, like what made you come up with the idea to do this podcast?
Yeah, and so a lot of the credit I think goes to Jared Urandu, who started the podcast High Resolution, which was fantastic. It's a podcast that sat down with like I think 20 leaders of the design industry, and it was like really great to listen to. But a lot of the content just like I felt wasn't as relevant to students or just beginners. Like, you know, listening about how to become a good design manager or like influence your team or being a solo designer like is great, like because those things could happen to you. But right now you don't even have like the opportunity to get to one of those scenarios, right? I think the industry like has a lot of great resources for people who are in the industry, but not necessarily for people who want to get in the industry. So I knew that the podcast and video series was like a good model. And what I found is that we teach a class at Cornell called Introduction to Digital Product Design. It's a student taught class, and Andrew talked a lot about it. And I was like, what if we open source that education in the form of a podcast or video series? So with High Resolution in this class, kind of merging that and trying to create just a better resources or kicking off like a new area where resources for beginners could emerge was kind of why I had thought this would be a good idea or why this idea even came up. And then it was a matter of just stalking as many people as I could, which I think you and I both know, like friends of friends or just like just hitting up people on Facebook because like they're students too, so it's not weird. And I think that's what's cool about doing this is like there isn't like a PR team you have to talk to or a company you have to like get by. It's just like, yo, like, you know the struggle about breaking in as an unconventional person, and so do I. So like, what if we talk about it and see what can happen?
Definitely, it's very organic in that regard. So we've talked to more than a dozen very different types of designers, people who are, I guess, your senior or your junior within, I guess, digital product design, but also photographer, 3D artist, all kinds of different things. So with like such a broad scape of things things that have been discussed, is there like any big learnings that you've had, big takeaways?
Yeah. So I think the first is that a lot of the people that we talked to were in positions that didn't really help them get to where they wanted to be. Like they had to hustle and they had to work very, very hard to do what they wanted to do. And I think that's the number one takeaway is like you have to be able to work hard. Like being at a specific school or being, like knowing someone or whatnot, like sure that helps. But I think there's this famous quote where it's like when hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. So all the people we talk to are extremely hardworking in what they do, and that's why they're so good at what they do. So that's number one. And number two is there are a lot of different fields of design, and I didn't realize that. Like I knew we were talking to designers, but like, from this like Dio who does social virtual reality to like Cameron who's a photographer, like these are completely different domains. So I think it's kind of a new thing for me, or has recently been a new thing for me to go and explore those domains. Like digital product design is great, and at some point you can read as many articles as you want about UX, but at some point they do all say the same thing. But you won't, by looking at other domains, you get another dimension about product design, even though you're not looking at product design. So I think the second takeaway is to explore different things, like pick up a camera, pick up like Unity, something else to like get your brain reset and make it more uncomfortable. And it'll give you a better idea of what other designers do.
Yeah, I'm sure that this is something that you can, I guess these interviews have helped inform certainly my own design philosophy. I'm sure you'll probably say the same thing. It's something you can take to industry.
Yeah.
Definitely make your work even better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd now like to speak with you about your professional exposure. As you mentioned, your first like official design internship was with Intuit.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about how you got there?
Yeah. So I went to a hackathon during my semester off, so in the fall. This was YHack, or Yale's hackathon, and Intuit was one of the sponsors. So I, was just talking to them, and I was like, hey, I'm looking for product design positions. I'm going to be a freshman at Cornell. And they mentioned that they actually had an office in Dallas, which I was like, oh, that's perfect. Like, I live right there. And I was really interested in just the fact that like I could possibly be home and work at Intuit. And I interviewed in March, so it took them like 5 or 6 months to get back to me. And I was able to interview in person since the office was close to home. And what every designer there remembered, whoever I met, they were like, oh, you're the kid who did like the Uber thing. Like James is the VP of design for Intuit Dallas, had like kind of briefed them on like what I had done or who I was. And what was interesting is that project, or that Uber project, is like what kind of helped me kickstart like my career in design. Because not only was it for Intuit, but it was also like with Facebook, like that's the same case study I used. Whenever people ask how did you get into design, like I always refer back to that experience. So I think the importance of side projects should not go unnoticed, because sometimes it's the side project and not like your actual experiences that can help you out in the long run. But I'll never forget, so during my interview with Intuit, I was interviewing with James Helms, who was the VP of design in Dallas, and he was scrolling through my Uber case study, and he point blank looked at one of the screens I had mocked, and he was like, what the fuck is this? And I was like, okay, I don't know if like you're upset or like you're like you just want to see what I respond. And I think, sometimes interviewers are going to be like, just be point blank, and like you should be able to back up what you've done and why you did it. So I was able to work at Intuit, which was like a great experience. Awesome place, awesome people. They're so great that they were like, you should try something else for your next summer, which I think is great from a company's perspective to like care about you more than like their own headcount. And then with Facebook, it more so came to just refining my portfolio and understanding how an app critique works, because that's very unique to their interview process.
Sure. So I guess between the two internships that you've held for product design, what's the difference in the types of responsibilities that you've had?
Yeah. So with Intuit, I think it was primarily, it seemed like more of a typical internship in that like you have this project, you have 10 weeks to do it. Whereas Facebook was a massive roller coaster, just from like internal changes and whatnot to, working with a remote team in Menlo Park while I was in New York City. So there's a lot more going on. Whereas at Intuit, like I was at home, like I was like, my friends were there. It was like, the summer after freshman year. So it's a lot more relaxed, a lot more fun. Whereas Facebook was like, almost like I felt like a full-time employee. So I think the responsibilities were like a lot heavier at Facebook, but the like initial growth was more into it just because that was my first real experience.
Sure, that's sensible.
Yeah.
So between your two internships, obviously after interning at Intuit, you have a little more familiarity with the design lexicon, and you generally can probably navigate Sketch a lot more fluently. What other types of things did you do to try to, I guess, level up between those two internships?
So I more so like what I did is before Facebook, which was like in April, I knew who my manager was going to be. So I got on the phone with him and I wrote up this doc of like my goals for the summer. And two of them were become like a better prototyper, because I think if your ability to prototype determines how effective meetings can be and how effective your communication is. And then my second one is get better at visual design, just because Cornell has no like true graphic design program or classes. And at Intuit, I was working on I was essentially building a product from scratch. So I created all the visual design guidelines, for better or for worse. And I think communicating that early on with my manager really helped set up my projects for the summer. So one was Desktop Kit, which is on facebook.design. So it's a UI resource for designers who make desktop applications. And that was like strictly vector pixel pushing, like being in Sketch for hours. And I don't think like that project would have like aligned so well with me if I had not like informed him or other people at Facebook that these are like what I want to get out of my 10 weeks here. So having an idea of what I wanted and what I wanted to improve on from my previous experience, I think helped me have a good experience at Facebook, and then even after Facebook, understand like what I want to do after, like now.
Do you have any idea of some things that you want to work on perhaps for the next summer?
Yeah, I think, so still the visual design thing, because I worked on business platforms at Facebook, which was like great from product thinking perspective, but a lot of things at Facebook visual design wise are pretty scoped out because it has to look like Facebook, and they have really, really great design tools. So I still want to like develop my own personal craft, like being able to do things from scratch. So that means taking on more freelance work because that's what that requires you to do. Doing graphic design abroad just because it doesn't exist here, so might as well try it somewhere else. And then joining Instagram next summer because while Facebook loves to like move fast and break things, I think Instagram takes a more careful approach when it comes to design, or at least that's what I've heard. So based off those kind of, I guess, rumors, I'm gonna go for that experience.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. So you're part of, I guess, this burgeoning design community at Cornell, helmed by people we've interviewed like Nicole and Andrew. Yeah. And obviously there's a very big component of that is design theory education in the form of, I guess, projects through CU App Dev or the Intro to Digital Product Design class that you're now a teacher of. Yeah. But there's also a component of it that is industry coaching or I guess, walking through the interview process with somebody who's already been through it. And obviously, this is not something that you can get everywhere. So do you have anything to say to somebody who might not have a community like that? Yeah.
I think if let's say you go to a school, or let's say you didn't go to college and you want to do this and you don't know people, like directly correlated to your school or your personal networks or whatever, don't be afraid to contact anyone that you admire, because most likely or not, they'll be willing to get on the phone with you and walk through that. I think a lot of people know that they should hit up people. Like they should contact people in the industry, they should contact like ex-interns to see what the process was like. It's much easier to have or make that a very productive conversation if you have like something to talk about. Not necessarily like, oh, like what did you like or what did you not like, but like, here's my portfolio, like can we just go over it? Right, because now you have something to talk about for 30 minutes rather than just making up like behavioral questions, if that makes sense. Like behavioral questions are great, but like you also want to utilize the knowledge that they've had and the experience they've had. So one, don't be afraid to contact people. And the more you contact, the better hit rate you'll have. Right. And two is like, bring something to the conversation. Questions are great, but actual content would be even greater.
So by this point, you're old hat at this, but now is time for our poll question section, where we ask our interviewees questions that we've, I guess, reached out to the community on Facebook and on Medium, seeing what kinds of questions they'd like asked. So I guess the first one is, there are often discrepancies between what the reality is and what the design industry perceives for students. Is there anything you want to speak about that?
Yeah, I think it kind of goes back to what I said initially, like the resources and what exists are great for people in the industry. They're like great to hear for students, but they're not necessarily relevant. And I think the industry is like understanding that better, right? Because now you have things like out of office hours, which you can schedule time with designers in the industry. You have Generation Design by Andreessen Horowitz, which is just like a fantastic program for people who are trying to break in. And now you have Facebook University for product design. So like, I think people are seeing it. I think there should be more support. I think it's not to the level of software engineering yet, right? Like, I think Google does so many things for like software engineering related materials, whether that's like the summer camp or like the engineering practicum program, and other companies, really help out with that. But I think design is like still trying to get there. And I think people or companies and designers don't realize the importance of those programs and how it really helps you shape you as a student who doesn't go to a design school. Sure. Because there's maybe 10 design schools that are pretty represented in the industry, but there's many more other universities that have potential. And understanding that this is a field that so many people want to do because they're interested in this type of work means that there should be as equal, if not more, resources to help everyone out. So hopefully by the time this episode releases, there's even more support from the industry.
Definitely. So you have quite a bit to manage in your life. You're a technical major, design lead for an engineering project team, teaching a design class, career moves, and demanding personal projects like this one. How do you stay on top of it all?
I think the biggest thing for me is to not think about everything that I have to do. And this sounds very counterintuitive. Like, I don't want to psych myself out or stress myself out. Like, for example, like I like to wake up early. Like, I like to sleep before midnight, which is very weird for some people because they'll get like, I'll respond to their messages at like 6 a.m. But if I think about all the things that are going on, then I feel like I can't do it, I guess. And even now, like, you know, I think you slowly learn, like when you start off in college, you try to do everything and you end up half-assing everything. And then you like realize and you cut all the stuff down to like one thing you want to do really well. So for example, like with school clubs, like app dev is the only club I do. Or with side projects, this is the only thing I'll do. With taking classes, like I'll take maybe 4-ish classes. Like I won't go crazy and take 23 credits just to say I take 23 credits because I personally just don't see value in that. Another thing that I like to do is like stay analog. So I just write down everything that I have to do like this week and then like kind of figure out when am I going to do it to be like very, very like, what is it called? Prescriptive as to like how I manage things.
Sure.
Of course, things can be better. Like things could be, you know, for example, like this podcast, maybe we could have done much more in terms of marketing and shipping and whatnot. But to some extent, like even getting the episodes out, I think is a win, considering everything that we have going on. And grades, you know, so I'm not the type, I don't have the philosophy where it's like, you know, get like a 2.9 and then like his grades don't matter, or I'm not a philosophy, like I don't have the philosophy of get a 4.0 or die. I'm very much like, I've always been like a B+, like A- type of student since like 9th grade. Like if I know that, like knowing 80% of the material is a big deal, in my opinion. Like if you just say that, like I know 80% of data science, like that's sick.
Yeah, that's
right?
You're an expert. Yeah.
You're like there, you know what I'm saying? Like 90's cool, but like 80's not bad.
Right.
I try to get what I want out of my classes and take classes that have nothing to do with my major. So this past semester I took Intro to Photography, which is black and white film, which I think every designer should take because you learn how tedious forming something can be.
Oh yeah.
I think photography has direct correlations with design, and more designers should take black and white photography classes. If you have one, take it. If you have a dark room in your university, use it. Because it gets literally you have to use your hands to make these prints. And it helps you see the world differently and how elements work together.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah. I've always found it incredibly funny how different our sleep schedules are, or just our day schedules. I often will be going to bed and texting you as you're waking up around 5 a.m.
But it works because that means we're working 24 hours a day.
That's true, yeah.
Interesting.
No stops. The grind doesn't stop ever. Okay, so anyway, there's a lot of resources out there on Medium, on YouTube, all kinds of places where people are trying to give you their advice on design, give you their philosophy. So how do you filter out what is good and what is just noise?
Yeah, earlier I think I said like at some point the UX articles, like you can probably predict what it's going to say before it says it. I think like unfollowing those tags on Medium to be very explicit, and then like following things that you don't know anything about, whether that's like digital currencies, photography, whatever, helps like resurface your feed. Honestly, recently what's been really big for me is Reddit, like, because product design doesn't really exist on Reddit yet. I think it's more like graphic design or photography or like game development's huge on Reddit, and like trying to tap into different communities where it's not like people trying to market their personal brands, but really just like understand what different softwares do and what's the advantage and disadvantage, or like, are Udacity nanodegrees worth it? Like I think certain things you might want to like try different fields rather than reading the same thing over and over again. So if I see a title where like I have an idea of what this is gonna say, I don't read it. And I might, if it's someone I know, then I'll probably like look at it because like I trust their content.
Yeah. So I guess somewhat stemming off of that, do you have any mentors in particular that you follow to stay inspired, or any pseudo mentors, websites, things of that nature?
Yeah. So direct mentors would be Jared. So like he's been great in terms of like structuring this podcast.
Jared from High Resolution.
Jared from High Resolution, yes. Like even throughout the summer, like he looked at like my midpoint feedback and like from Facebook, or like I told him like what they said and kind of give me some tips as to what to do. Andrew Aquino is probably the reason why like I was able to actually like kind of level up in design. Nicole, who's the reason why I got into design. So those are like actual people. In terms of pseudo mentors, I think there's not necessarily like websites per se. More recently, like books I think are good mentors in helping you understand how people work or people think. So like I think reading things that aren't design related makes you a better designer, because as a designer it's your job to understand the world and people, and design books teach you design and not the world and people. So like reading fiction or reading more books related to anthropology I think has helped shape what I want to do and how I view things. So I think books are great mentors as well.
Yeah.
So you teach a design class here. You are a design leader on a team here. You're definitely, by all accounts, a design leader at Cornell. And I'm sure you get a lot of feedback requests and questions about how to get into the industry. So for somebody who is trying to break in, are there any pieces of immediately actionable advice you could give them?
Yeah. So if I'm assuming people listening to this have like read the Medium articles or like seen other people's portfolios or like know what they have to do but just haven't done it yet.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's always that that saying that like, you know, you can read all you want, but like you actually have to do the thing to like get better at it, whether that's like sports or photography or even design. And I think other guests have said this before, and it's kind of helped me shape my answer to this, where I think if you feel like you're not actually learning anything, then it means you have to do something rather than continuously reading. Because you could read about all the principles you want, but then you have to execute them at some point. So I think hackathons are like a great medium for you to do that. Like you have to do something for 24 hours, right? Like it's a very good constraint, and it will be built, right? Because like you have to make something. And I think a lot of people forget that you can continue things after a hackathon and really refine it. Mm. So my immediate actionable advice would be go to a hackathon if you've already read a lot. And if you haven't read a lot, I think there's enough articles to get you kickstarted as like what books and stuff to read. There's too many listicles out there. Mm-hmm. So if you haven't, you know, understood what product design is, just Google it and then go from there.
Sure. So we've talked quite a bit about your very impressive background and how you've navigated this field. What's next for you?
I think as of like this podcast episode recording, going abroad and understanding graphic design principles.
Oh, where are you going abroad?
Going to Copenhagen to study graphic design, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, so I think that'll be fun because like it'll be like 6 months of pure design studio and then like never looking at it again, because I think that'll be enough. Other than that, trying to get this podcast out there and see what happens. Yeah.
Very admirable. Sahil, thank you so much for sitting for this interview. And I've had a great time working on this podcast with you.
Thanks, Omar. You too.
Absolutely.
Students Who Design is written and produced by Sahil Khoja and Omar Abdul Rahim. Visit our website, studentswho.design, for more information.